Hello, and welcome to another episode of Spark Talk. Today's discussion is on Trump's war drive against Venezuela and really against all of Latin America and the Caribbean. In a recent article written by our comrades in Mexico, they explain that under the pretext of a war on foreign narco-terrorists, Trump has deployed 8 warships, several Navy P-8 aircraft, and an attack submarine near the Venezuelan coast. This enormous military force has already claimed its first victims. There's been attacks against 3 small boats and their crews who've been basically destroyed extrajudicially. And Trump has upped these threats, and he's threatening to invade Venezuela by land and air. And he's also set a $50 million bounty for the capture of Nicolas Maduro. So to discuss this and the situation in the region, I'm joined by Comrade Victor from Mexico. Hi, Comrade.
Hey, Mansa. Thank you for having me.
Okay, well, thank you for making the time. We're recording this on Sunday. Thanks for making the time. Could you start by giving us a bit of a sense of what is the situation? I mean, I summarized a little bit what you guys wrote in your article, but can you maybe elaborate? Like, what's really happening on the ground?
Okay. So basically, and I want to take a little bit on what you and Perot said on the last podcast on the international situation. Okay, what's happening? So the US is like clamping down on Latin America. It really needs to like squeeze it and really like align it to its overall interest of like stopping or slowing down the decline of the US imperialists as the hegemon. That means that regimes like Maduro in Venezuela that try to have this more autonomy, like have this like balancing act between the US and mostly China, it can no longer be accepted. It can no longer be tolerated. So it really needs to basically like align the regimes of Latin America behind it and with all the means at its disposal. And that's why since the Venezuela, like historically in the last decades has like consistently go in a more like autonomous direction and, resisted the US imperialism, it needs to really be, it's going to go down either by force or, like fostering a coup or, I don't know, just fostering the discontent of the masses in a pro-imperialist direction. But, the thing is that Venezuela cannot go in the direction it has gone to this point. So that's why the US is like making this huge demonstration of force and also like trying to basically do the same in one way or another with every country in Latin America. We've seen it here in Mexico, how basically Trump is dictating terms to Sheinbaum and Sheinbaum while keeping this rhetoric of we're defending our national sovereignty is basically acceding to Trump's terms. Argentina is the most crass example, with Milei and Trump directly saying to Milei himself that, the Milei government, that he will send economic aid to stop the Argentine peso to like ramp up even more, but only if he wins like the coming elections, like the midterm elections. And
which will be a big test.
Yeah, also having the conflict with Colombia. I mean, it's generalized, really. So
yeah, absolutely. Could you speak a little bit about the Caribbean as well? Because there's the bigger countries of Latin America, but the small island nations, they've been feeling a little bit of the heat as well. I mean, as well, not to mention that the attacks have been in the actual Caribbean.
Yeah, the Caribbean is a conglomerate of nations. Just to speak of a couple, I mean, for example, we have like, obviously the most glaring example is Cuba, which again, Trump is ramping up against the foreign worker state. Also, many countries in the Caribbean are already facing like deep economic crises, and Trump is basically using it to like basically mold all the Caribbean and Latin America, become like this fortified backyard for the imperialists, not accepting any measure of autonomy. It's very clear how he wants the Caribbean and Latin America to just be the US and the US alone.
Yeah. I wanted to mention in this regard, comrades in the United States recently wrote an article on Puerto Rico called How to Win the Working Class to Independence. And in that, they point to how actually, Puerto Rico is an actual colony of the United States, and it's basically being used as a military base as part of Trump's war drive against all of Latin America. So this really has implications for galvanizing the Latino masses there's a lot of potential there for building united anti-imperialist struggle against the US. But we'll come back to that in a bit. Now, Venezuela's been under the gun for decades, right? I mean, this
Mhm.
goes back to Chavez, right? So I don't want to get into the whole history of this, but Venezuela is a country that has been a thorn in the side of the United States. The U.S. doesn't like that it did all these radical things, that it gave more inspiration to other Latin American struggles and so on. But after Chavez died, then we had Maduro. And some of the things that regularly makes the news is a dire state of the economy of Venezuela, which I think is also an important part in understanding just how crucial the situation is in terms both of the need to defend Venezuela against Trump, but also trying to see that, well, Maduro is not really capable of fighting the US given the state of the country. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the state of Venezuela under Maduro.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm not an expert in Venezuela, but seeing it from the standpoint of another Latin American country, Mexico, you hear like this constant thing in the news about the dire state of the country. The mass migrations to other countries. Actually, Mexico has seen a rise in the migration of Venezuelan people that are fleeing from the economic starvation, the rise of crime, and all these things, even the political repression, that is a thing, that the Maduro regime has done in order to keep itself in power. But, the US is clamping down, and it has been clamping down on Venezuela for like years now, like decades, and it's been ramping up these measures against the Chavista regime. Obviously, you have to start from there to get a real hold on the country. Like, this is an offensive of imperialism against Venezuela. And you need to defend Venezuela against
Mhm.
imperialism, and including the Maduro regime,
Yeah.
because it is very important who gets to overthrow Maduro.
Yeah.
If
It's the
the
decisive
imperialists,
question, actually.
yeah, if the imperialists overthrow Maduro, that's not in the interest, not just of the Venezuelan masses, but of the whole Latin American masses in general. It's
Hmm.
like it will just fortify the position of imperialism in the region. It will basically be a deterrent factor against anyone trying to fight against imperialism, basically. And it will be a whole defeat for the working class, really. And if the things go the other way, and if a revolutionary vanguard can like undercut the appeal of Maduro and really show what it's needed to fight against those same imperialists, it will be a whole different situation, because then it will be the working class which will be strengthened in Venezuela
Hmm.
and in the whole region.
Hmm.
So, and in that sense, because from the standpoint, for example, of what it is to be done, Venezuela, and it actually shows like the contradictions, because for one, Maduro has instated programs to like military train the people to defend against the imperialists, which is
Yep.
a very radical measure, like but basically giving military training to civilians to help
Yeah,
defend the
it's
country,
a
which is
very good thing. And I've seen reports that he's mobilizing the peasants and the communes with machetes,
that's why the people have illusions in them, because they lean on them to fight against imperialism. But
Mhm.
at the same time, the whole response of Maduro actually shows the dead end of populism and Chavismo, because, at the same time, it's very funny to me, at least, because you see it like in these press conferences, dressed in a military outfit, and surrounded by military men and generals and something, and at the same time saying to Trump, that he's misled, that he's being misinformed, basically begging him not to go to
Yep.
war with Venezuela. Like trying to
Yep.
appease Trump, like basically saying that it's not in the interests of the U.S. to go to war with Venezuela, that Trump is being misled, basically excusing Trump for doing this. And at the same time, and this is very important, for example, not really calling on the Latin American masses to defend Venezuela, like not
Yep.
really appealing
This
to
is the
them.
biggest weapon that
Yeah,
you
the
have.
biggest weapon. I mean, for example, in Mexico is basically like the power source of the U.S. in a way. It has a lot of control on the production that goes to the U.S. It has a lot of workers that directly help to feed the U.S. various chains of production of the U.S. And are too getting squeezed. Like we have lockouts, we have factories and industries that say that they are leaving Mexico for the U.S. or demanding more super exploitation conditions in order to stay. So there's anger in the working class, obviously, against the imperialists because of what Trump's doing. At the same time, they're being told by the Sheinbaum government to, just lie down. We're taking care of it. And, just demobilizing them, just really keeping them on the leash. So the Venezuelan masses have a direct interest in winning over these workers to their side and actually undercutting the propaganda that is built against Venezuela. Because the Mexican working class, for example, have these really contradictory feelings towards Venezuela. Because for one, they can see that the U.S. is screwing Venezuelans up, which obviously the Mexican masses can relate to. But at the same time, since the working class leaders of the Mexican working class and the populists have sold to them for decades that the way forward is integration with the U.S. and staying by with the deals with the U.S. imperialists. So, and that they can see that the Maduro regime has not and cannot resolve the fundamental questions, And now that it has to come down with these repressive measures and, this clamping down on its own people to stay in power, it's very easy for the imperialists and the populists, to distance themselves, from the populist, Mexican populace in particular, trying to make this balancing act of saying things on Venezuela, condemning the U.S., but not also coming very militantly in defense of these things. And many workers do not see a point in defending Venezuela because it will be you're just defending another socialist tyrant and this dictatorship and whatnot, and we have people starving there and coming here and then doing crimes in Mexico. It's very contradictory, but the Venezuelans have a direct interest in winning the Mexican workers and showing them why it's not in their interests to let the U.S. do its way with Venezuela. And that's what Maduro is not doing. It's basically fortifying Venezuela supposedly to resist the aggression, but at the same time living it alone.
Yeah. And I think this is an important point, that why is Maduro not doing it? Because, if the working class is mobilized, then there's no saying, there's no telling where that anger will go. It could go against Maduro himself. So he has to be very, very careful about mobilizing the masses because it could very easily threaten his own situation, especially given how dire the situation is economically for the country. I want to bring it to a couple of other points. One, I thought it's very interesting, your points on the contradictions of the Mexican working class. And it's actually very, very sad in a way because all of Latin America feels very strongly the pillage that Yankee imperialism conducts in all of the Latin American nations. So it's a bit tragic to see just how the consciousness is changing because they see, that experiment in Venezuela, that's not really what socialism is. Then what's the point of defending it? Look at that guy. There's crime. There's all of this stuff. So that's a problem, and I think that's definitely a challenge in terms of building the struggle to defend Venezuela. And I appreciate that you said also that we defend not only Venezuela but also the Maduro regime. That's really a point that I think the left either minimizes or overlooks because they don't want to say that they defend this, hated dictator type. But, as you said, it matters who overthrows Maduro. Is it going to be the pro-imperialist opposition, who recently won the Nobel Peace Prize? Is it going to be the opposition, and a regime change backed by the U.S.? Or is it going to be the masses themselves who will overthrow Maduro to go in a progressive direction? So all of these points are really, really important. I wonder, actually, if you could touch on the point, narco-terrorism. What is this? Because I think that's this big sort of ideology that's being pushed a lot. Not just against Venezuela, against Mexico as well, as you said. Fighting the cartels, so I'm going to push the tariffs, and fighting narco-terrorism, so I'm going to bomb the boats in the Caribbean. These are being pushed to justify blatant like blatant murders, essentially. But I wonder if you could explain a little bit about how to approach that as a communist.
Basically, this thing actually relates very directly, like you said, to Mexico, because what Trump is doing is basically he wants to label the drug cartels as terrorist organizations. And from that, if he gets that, he gets away with it, basically, according to, the fight against terrorism that the U.S. started on the 2000s, it will give him like basically free way to invade other countries on the pretext of fighting terrorism. So, and it's actually very interesting to see because obviously it's a ploy from the imperialist part to give itself more powers to do whatever the hell it wants in the region and basically justify, like it's happening right now, like the wanton murder of civilians and the subjugation, the open threat of invasion of another country that is openly defying or just wanted more autonomy for itself from the US as no, this will not do anymore and we will invade you. We will threaten military use on you if you don't go along with our diktats, and there's that from the part of the imperialists. But the funny thing is that from the from the working class standpoint, actually, it's something of a contradictory consciousness because, for one, obviously the U.S. it's doing it for its own purposes, but it's not like it's inventing a situation in the violence that comes with the illegal drug trade and so on. Because the thing is, and that's actually one point that, for example, here in Mexico, the one point that the opposition has been able to more like consistently like rally some amount of support, not much, but at this point, but some audience against the Morena government is the fact that okay, it said that it will end the war on drugs, the war on the narcos, and will like basically bring peace back. That was one of the promises, and obviously the violence is not going down. The working masses still face a lot of insecurity, like from very minor things like theft to very serious crimes like murder, rape. All these things happen like on a daily basis, and the working masses suffer it and are sick of it, and that they can see that the populists are just like lying through their teeth, like so these solutions that the imperialists come up have a resonance in the sense that, well, obviously it will not go in the interest of the masses, but they intersect like this discontent that exists for a real problem that exists. And so it's actually a somewhat clever way to actually try to undercut the support for the populists because they attack one very specific aspiration that the masses do have, which is for a peaceful life. And so it makes it easy to further isolate Venezuela because it makes it easy to present it as an operation, a security operation, when it's actually an operation to subjugate not just Venezuela but the entire region even further.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it's very concrete. I'm just looking at your article here. It says that, quote, the classification of Mexican drug cartels, or I mean, talking about narco-terrorism in generally, as terrorist organizations is a measure that will be used against anyone who even minimally stands up to the imperialists. Quote. Now, this obviously means against the masses, against the labor movement. Ultimately, it's very concrete because what does this mean? So, okay, the US wants to fight the drug cartels. How does it do that? It does that through the DEA, through arms of the imperialist state. So what does this mean? It gives them a blank check to go and conduct their operations on the sovereign soil of countries like Mexico, Venezuela, whatever have you. So this is not a moral question. It's not about like, oh, are you against drugs? Are you not? Oh, what are you talking about? It's really just a question of, yes, it's a problem, but the DEA, the CIA, all these imperialist agencies, they, one, have no business entering and dealing with the sovereign matters of another country. Two, it's a joke to also think that they're really going to actually address these, even in the United States itself. And three, yes, okay, the cartels of course are a problem and they do terrorize the people, but again, it's a question ultimately of like, what are the methods you're going to use to deal with this? Will it be working class methods, or will it be, imperialist agencies clamping down through sheer terror, just like we're seeing in the Caribbean? So I think that's an important point, actually, that these measures ultimately will be used as attacks against the sovereign interests of Latin American nations. I wonder if we can start summing this up. I mean, obviously, there's a lot more to be said. This has direct implications for the American working class right now, for the fight against Trump at the moment, which is entirely dominated by liberals. But I guess I just want to summarize some of the key points and then ask you to comment a little bit on what's next. So let's just be very, very clear. We defend Venezuela. We defend Maduro. Like, there's no question about it. It matters. Yes, Venezuela is in a dire state, but it matters how this is dealt with. And we are for working class methods. We are opposed to this war drive. We are opposed to the measures being used by the imperialists, in the guise of fighting drugs and the cartels and narco-terrorism. These are all just ways of attacking Latin American nations. And the basic need is for an anti-imperialist struggle of the Latin American masses. And you've pointed to some of the challenges, I think, by talking about the situation amongst people in Mexico, the sort of contradictory consciousness. I wonder if you want to say something more generally about how to go forward from here and what you see as tasks in the region.
Yeah. Well, I think that this small article in the new Anti-Imperialista really cuts precisely against this overwhelming feeling of, like nothing can be done, or, like you have to rely on the populist governments to do something, and actually undercutting this developing consciousness of not seeing the point in defending these various regimes from the attack. Because it's one thing in the case of a country that's been under the spotlight and been under fire for this long. It's more easily to arouse support, because it's so obvious that it's an imperialist attack. But since now it's being like mixed up with all these things like the drug cartel situation and the dire situation in Venezuela and the repressive actions of the Maduro regime, it's very easy to confuse the workers to where their real interests stand and to take them in a pro-imperialist way. So it really needs to first, really, what is the agent that can actually liberate Venezuela and the whole Latin America? Obviously is the Latin America ones, the working masses that can really deal the biggest punches against the imperialists and have the interests and the strength to carry those out, basically. But for that, you really need a program that can speak to them, that can speak to their material interests. And in that sense is where you can actually really have an audience with the masses, basically. Because which is something that a large trend in the left does, like just denouncing Maduro as bourgeois, repressive, and, a dead end, which is it's not false. It's true, all those things. But if you do not really offer a way to fulfill the aspirations that are behind Maduro and stand from the point that, okay, yeah, we want Maduro to go, but we want him to be replaced by a Venezuelan working people's government, to replace Maduro, not a coup by the imperialists or a pro-imperialist democracy movement to overthrow him. It's very important that thing to be clear. And to do that, you really need to basically break the isolation of Venezuela right now. You really need to struggle to link the cause of defending Venezuela to defending the whole region from the onslaught of imperialists and really defend the living conditions of the working masses, which are everywhere being squeezed.
I mean, speaking of people being squeezed, I think crucially, it's also the working class in the United States itself. They maybe haven't felt the squeeze that Trump is putting on. Maybe there's still layers that are, hoping that industry is going to come back home and there's going to be, good jobs again. But the attacks are coming. So it's also the American working class that has a fundamental interest in opposing Trump's war drive against Venezuela. Because why? It's the same point that you're making about the shared material interest. To the extent that the movement in Latin America is strengthened, it also strengthens the hand of the American workers against Trump in fighting for their own conditions, and vice versa. So I think that unity throughout all of North and South America is key.
Yeah, and also that undercuts also the way in which Maduro is actually maneuvering, because, like I said, it's very clear how he is in this very tight balancing act between, obviously leaning on the masses to try to resist this aggression, while also speaking to Trump to supposedly come back to a reasonable stand. And
Yeah,
also, like, basically, it's writing off the American working class. There's nothing for the American working class in
yeah,
Maduro's program. And it's logical, because Maduro is basically speaking from the standpoint of the Venezuelan elite. So it is in this very tight situation with which he needs the masses to, like, try to deter the imperialists from further attacking, because they have already done so. But it also cannot unleash them, because obviously, like you said, it will pose a fatal danger for the local bourgeoisie in Venezuela, but also it will basically call into question the stability of the regimes that he sees as allies. For example, Mexico. Actually, they are, like, in somewhat diplomatically good terms, because they are both populists. But if Maduro could really unleash the Venezuelan working class, it will also be like a beacon of light for the Mexican working class, and that will be a
hmm
problem for Sheinbaum, basically.
hmm
So, in
yes,
order to basically keep his own allies, like, happy, he's actually screwing the Venezuelan masses, because
yeah,
it's keeping them on a tight leash and basically keeping them from going for the things that will make the greatest punch against imperialism in
yeah,
Latin America, and, like you say, in the whole continent, in the
hmm
US, in Canada, in Quebec as well.
hmm
The working masses of this continent do not have an interest in keep being subjugated by imperialism, obviously.
hmm
So it's very easy to make that connection, in fact.
absolutely.
But the populists confuse the masses on what to do, and even how to treat imperialism. Like I said,
Yeah,
the Mexican working class in particular, since the economy is so tied to the US, there's this consciousness of, oh no, we need to keep being buddy with the US. It's like we need to the imperialist trade deals to continue. From that standpoint, it's very easy for their leaders and the populists to kind of, like, let Venezuela hang by itself.
I do appreciate that point about how the populists in Latin America, how they end up trampling on the struggles of the masses because they're afraid of unleashing them. But I think also what you just laid out points to some of the tasks for the left. Now, of course, we have a lot of work to do on Venezuela, and we hope to do this in the coming period. But I think as the situation heats up more and more, one of the central tasks is, of course, to defend Venezuela, as most of the left is saying. They're not all saying defend Maduro. We must defend Maduro as well. But I think crucially, on the ground in their work, it's to motivate exactly what you've been talking about, is how to build the unity of the masses in Latin America, with the working class in the United States and Quebec and Canada and so on. Like how to really pose a united challenge to American imperialism, which is crushing the world as it's trying to get back on top. So thank you for taking the time to join us. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, not really. I mean, obviously, I would like to invite our readers to read the new Anti-Imperialista. I mean, it
Mhm.
has a lot of articles specifically on the situation of the Mexican working class, various sectors of the Mexican working class,
Yeah.
precisely on the need of how to prepare a defense of the workers against
Mhm.
Trump's attacks, and exposing really how the strategy of Sheinbaum is basically leading them to greater defeats. We have an article by our comrades in the US of why the imperialists need Trumpism. Just wanted to, like, make this little publicity.
Yeah, for sure. No, no, always a good idea. Thank you. As always, you can follow our comrades in the Mexican section, the Grupo Espartacista de Mexico, on X and Instagram at him. Well, it's GEM_LCI. On YouTube, their channel is El Anti-imperialista -X6T. I'll link all this stuff in the show notes, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.